Most companies are looking to have a very regular quarterly revenue cadence. They're
Mhm.
not looking for lumpy quarters where one is good and one is bad. My career philosophy on leadership really is trying to set a shared vision. For us, if we can all agree on what we're trying to accomplish and the team gets a chance to participate in setting that goal, usually things work, pretty well as the year goes on, because then as we're doing our check-ins and our status meetings and the various project updates, folks know the direction and they align to the direction, and normally they're fairly honest about their progress. And
Mm.
have they really gotten as far as they said they would, because they helped define the metrics and the timing? And if not, the next part of what I would say with my philosophy is trying to do some coaching without telling them what they need to fix or how they need to fix it. I find if you give them a little room for some self-discovery and you try to ask some questions from their opinion about what is or isn't going well and why, and what they might do to course correct, I find that generally works pretty well. And as a
Okay.
leader, yeah, I would say that's the way I try to approach things.
Okay. I love that. So let's talk about the metrics that you would choose,
Okay.
and what would you say these metrics do for you?
Sure. The metrics change or they vary depending upon who the roles are that we're supporting,
Mhm.
whether they are an SDR or an outside sales rep, or whether they're a technical person. They also change depending on the product you're selling or your go-to-market strategy. Are you a SaaS vendor, or the maturity of the company? So when I seek to set metrics, and really in the beginning, they might be more activity based as we're trying to get to something new. They
Mhm.
may be completing training, certifying them on the training, but then they very quickly move past activity and into where we really need them, which is behavior change and then successful outcomes. So is the manager witnessing changes in the, let's say, the messaging on a sales call because he's participating, or she, with their rep? Are we starting to see pipeline growing in an area that we as a company are trying to move towards? Are we starting to see closed in one deals? So the metrics will start to be activity based, and then they will move more to behavior and outcome based. And we
Mm.
can talk about some of the specific ones if you want to get into any of those.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah, yeah, sure. Some of them can be obviously forecast accuracy related, because most companies are looking to have a very regular quarterly revenue cadence. They're
Mhm.
not looking for lumpy quarters where one is good and one is bad. So as much as they can smooth that out. So obviously, what can we do to help with revenue forecast? And how can we train or enable reps to know when a deal is or isn't forecastable? And then making sure, again, as they are having successful outcomes, what are they doing to feed that funnel? So is that pipeline growing? And
Mhm.
then, of course, depending upon the market that we're competing in, we might be checking a win rate percentage, or a win rate percentage against a certain competitor. Let's say a competitor leapfrogged us, and now we've leapfrogged them with a product release. Now, are we measuring the wins against that competitor, and are we making any gains? So the metrics can go on and on. There's probably
Mhm.
20 or 30 different ones that I have. If you are in an acquisition mode and you've just acquired another company,
Mhm.
cross sell is going to be really big for you, because now you have the opportunity to sell two products to your customer, whereas before you could only sell one. So you definitely want to be measuring cross sell, or possibly new logos. If you are a SaaS vendor, you may be measuring ARR, you may be measuring your average recurring revenue, or you may be measuring LTC, your long-term contracts. And are you getting the customer to sign up for 2, 3, 4 years, so that again, you're getting back to that revenue consistency? So hopefully that gives you an idea of how we approach the metrics.
That makes a lot of sense. So, Beth, in the beginning, you track a lot of behave like activity based, and then you move on to things that change behaviors. What would you say your philosophies are for to getting reps to change their behaviors?
Right. It's practice, right? It's repetition. There's really no substitute for a safe place to learn. And training's not really training if you are speaking at somebody. Training is
Mm,
training when there's active participation. And we pause and we give the learners almost as much time speaking and working with material as we do the facilitators or the trainers speaking. So again, if we're trying to win against a certain competitor, we need to be able to have an opportunity to do our discovery calls properly and practice what might come up, what might the customer have heard about us, what might the competitor planted in the customer's mind, and how do we try to correct something in a polite but a persistent manner.
mhm,
So again, it really has to come with practice. It has to come with observation. The manager or others on the team that are supporting the rep have to observe the rep in the field and it happening. And then we have to have some time for a debrief, right?
mhm,
And a refresh and a readjustment. So it's a continuing process. And as soon as you think you've got it right, something changes with your customer or the
mhm.
market or the competition, and you're going back and doing it again.
Right, okay. That's a cool way to put it. And like thinking about this process then, because it always changes, do you have any philosophies behind having a cadence that's like tangible and coachable and you're able to, it's like repeatable?
Yes, as much as you can, everything you're trying to put together is scalable, predictable, and
Mhm,
repeatable with some variation for and some room for the differences around the world because regionally there will be different styles with selling, so it can't be that rigid. But yes, you're definitely trying to make sure every rep is consuming the same baseline material. If they're a
mm,
new hire, there is a certain framework and a cadence of content about giving them what they need when they need it and
mhm,
not everything all at once, and give them a chance to work with it and then practice it in a live setting and then come back and give them more information. So let them learn a few things well and then learn some additional things. If you're an existing rep, you're doing the same kind of thing. You're making sure that if there's changes to your product or the market or the industry, that they also are all going through the same training. So we know that they
mm,
did it. The training's the baseline, and then the practice, right? And then the observation. So the content may be different, but the scalability and the repeatability is because everybody's done it and you've baselined them, and then you see where they can go with that material.
mm. Okay, that makes sense. And so with this process, right, do you have um I'm thinking about, say, if you need to change a process or the way that you do your training, how would you
Yeah.
go about doing that?
Sure, absolutely. Listen, we know the metrics are working if we are growing in the right direction that the company has aligned for us.
Mm,
I try to put metrics in place that are scalable enough to last for a year and you're measuring against 4 quarters. Now,
mhm,
things in the market can change that, and there are times where you can't be so rigid. But if you change the metrics too often, you really can't measure your baseline and see if you're making an adjustment. So, quarterly adjustment at the minimum.
mhm,
But again, in the beginning, the first quarter or two, you're measuring activity, right? In the third or the fourth quarter, you've really moved past that. That's the table stakes. Everybody's done it. Now you're looking for the behavioral changes and the outcomes to make sure that we're going where the company has asked us to go. Is it right? Is it organic growth? Is it a cross sell? Is it longer term contracts? Is it more, right? It's generally always somehow around revenue and growth in some fashion. And the
mhm,
metrics are working if we are getting closer and closer each quarter. Our percentage points going up each quarter by a percentage of the reps, by the team, by the region. And if not, we need to inspect, did we get this right? Did the company get this right? And what do
mhm.
we do about it, right? So, and
Right.
together that's a larger conversation with a lot more people involved.
Mm, okay. So metrics, they do a really great job at like setting the baseline. What are your thoughts upon metrics helping to bridge that strategic and tactical divide?
Yes, definitely. Listen, again, the company will tell us what our goals are. They may
Mhm.
say we have double-digit revenue growth. They might say, we're going to grow 12, 13, 14% a year. That's a lot. Then how do you break that strategic goal down into operational, right? So does that, and again, this is where the sales leadership gets involved, because as the sales leader owns making that happen, he'll have different growth goals for the different regions, the different teams, and the different reps. And this is where you can have some variability in the metrics, or some variability in the percentage each rep needs to grow or get to. So
Mhm.
that's how you break it down from strategic to operational. And it's really important you're working with the sales leadership and their operations team who are architecting. Maybe it's not consistent double revenue growth for every region, right?
Mhm.
Maybe Asia is growing at a lower rate, or maybe they're doing something really well and we don't have to measure as tightly for them as we do the other regions.
Mm. Okay. So are you guys so you have your ops people, you have your sales leadership involved. What about A players and B players? Do you feel like there's
Sure.
a differences between the metrics that, like the numbers that they produce?
Well, there isn't a way of, certainly their quota is king, right?
Mhm.
So the more experienced reps, or the ones with the more strategic or the more valuable clients, will have the higher
Mhm.
quotas. Now, normally they'll need a little bit less care and feeding. They're already very good at what they do. They are, type A players to begin with. So you need to treat them a little more cautiously. They may have longer sales cycles. You're not measuring activity with them as much as you are outcome. And it may be a profitability that you're measuring with them, and it may be
Mm.
growth of a client that we know this client should be a $20 million a year client. They're a $10 million a year client. What are the activities we need to do more strategically to get them to have us be a strategic partner with them, so we get that additional revenue? So you may treat them very differently than you might, let's say, an SDR who's doing a lot of the cold calling and who is building the funnel or the pipeline for us.
Mm. Okay. So outcome over activity when it comes to an A player, looking at like the overall context behind what they're selling,
Yeah,
how much they're
right.
selling.
And I would say that the leadership team, sales leadership, sales enablement leadership, they really want to invest, a lot more in their B and possibly their C players. The C players may be in the wrong job, and we need to get them in the right position, and they'll start to move into B players, or it may just not be the right work for them. We need to sort that out pretty quickly. But the B players really are the ones that you would spend more time on, because they're the ones with more potential. They could, if given the right training and nurturing, the right adjustments to their behavior, and now all of a sudden you have more A players. So you should be spending less time on the outcome of the deal with the A player. They're most likely going to get there, but how
Mhm.
do you get more B players who have more opportunities, that they have the opportunity of closing? So how do you get more, right, more action and more activity out of them that they could possibly close?
Okay. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So Beth, you've got these B players there, right? But when it comes to your process for training and like tracking metrics, is there any mistakes that you've made where you thought this metric, this way of tracking has gone too far?
Sure. It's an interesting component where the sales leader will put you in charge of training and enabling their teams,
Hmm.
but you have to be very aware of what else the sales leadership or the company is asking that rep to do. And I think where I've made mistakes is not understanding the timing of what else a rep has to do. And if you put too much training on top of a time period where the rep has all of these other things that their leadership has asked them to do, then training becomes more of a check the box, because I need to get it done and get to these other things. So if I'm
Hmm.
working with the sales leader and we plan where the best spots are for training so the reps can give it their undivided attention, I've found that has gone much better than putting together the training plan and the timing in a vacuum all on my own.
Mm. Okay. It goes back to what you said before about just not throwing information at the rep and hoping that it's going to stick. You need to do it at the
Right.
right time, making sure that it's spread out a little bit.
And I try to give them enough time and enough warning, enough communication, because there are a lot of things going on and they have fire drills that come up with their customers.
Mhm.
But there are things that we may need them to learn. And so I try not to spam them. I try not to send out too many reminders. I try to give them ample time. I try to give them access to their training records. Their managers can have access to the training records. So ideally, that there's no, emergency or fire drill, and things will go better when you give them access to things and you give them time to get it done.
Mm. Okay, brilliant. So, last question for you, Beth, right?
Yeah.
If you were in a room full of leaders, what's that one burning question that you'd want an answer to when it comes to anything like training, ramping up reps, hiring, enablement, anything like that?
Yes. So when I'm speaking to a group of leaders that are, just what kind of leaders are they?
Leaders exactly like you. I think
Okay.
it's more about
Yeah.
trying to figure out what are other leaders thinking about that what are you thinking about that you would want the
Right.
answers to from other
Right.
leaders?
Yeah, things are different today. So I'm still benchmarking and asking a lot of questions around how we're enabling folks remotely to sell, right? That's still
Mm,
because we're never going back to the way we did things. So I'm constantly asking everybody in my role, what are they doing? How are they doing it? What methods, what technology are they using? How much are they doing? Because the fatigue on the Zoom, right? And
mm.
how much do we need to look at each other or look at ourselves, which is crazy, right? Because then that's distracting.
Yeah.
So I'm always asking for best practices really on the whole remote and mobile right now. That's really been my biggest questions with the folks that I engage with.